Shifting focus now to a slice of a very important and an interesting conversation I had with Professor Walter Andersen, a man who studied the RSS for over 5 decades, a man who understands the Indian American community like none other, and someone who is best to understand the relationship between the RSS and the BJP and the global optics as far as RSS is concerned. Take a look at this slice of the conversation that I had earlier with him. Today we have a very interesting guest, someone who understands the RSS very well, someone who I hope will understand the culture conversations that are taking place in India, someone who probably will be best placed to talk about the language wars that India is seeing and what it's like now for the Hindu nationalist sentiment that's really sort of peaked up in the last 2 decades or so. What is its future, and with the relationship between the RSS and Prime Minister Modi. Professor Walter Andersen, thank you so much for speaking to me on Spot On.
Thank you. It's my pleasure to be able to appear on Spot On with you for this presentation. And you're right that the RSS has now become, an organization that has much more input than it thought it would have 100 years ago when it was founded. This is the 100th year anniversary of its founding, and all sorts of programs are planned. But it's also, as people look at the organization, how did it change? What is it? And you're absolutely right. It is playing an increasingly important role. And that's something in itself has some concern about, because as you become more important in the political sense, you also become subject to attacks as well.
Mm-hmm. So what got you started into the research and study of RSS? Because that's not a topic that a lot of Western academics pick up.
I was a graduate student at the University of Chicago in mid to late 60s. And my advisor was Professor Lloyd and Suzanne Rudolph, very renowned Indianists, now unfortunately dead. And they had suggested to me that I pick a topic which would have relevance and where you would get in kind of on the ground floor on something, which is typically what happens with PhD dissertations. It's something that's new and started. And they said, we have just seen M.S. Golwalkar, who was the head of the RSS at the time that they had a visit to India in the 60s, early 60s. And they said, we are convinced this is an organization, the RSS, that he leads, that was going to play a major role in Indian politics. It was already beginning to at the time they saw him, but they predicted it would be more. So they said, why don't you do a study? You're absolutely right. Almost nobody else has. There was only 1 or 2 that I can think of. And they had difficulty getting access to the RSS to do studies about what it was all about. And so I did. I decided I changed my dissertation totally, and I had to take some courses, extra courses in Hindi, because I wasn't sure how much the people I would be interviewing would know English. So I'm glad I did. Actually, I did use some translators from the university where I was. Fellow students would say, oh, I'll translate for you, I'll go along. In fact, that's another story, because when I first came, I thought there would be some criticism of what I was doing, because the RSS is was then, it still is to a certain extent now, a very controversial group, but I never had any problems about that.